Yeah.
Okay. Are you comfortable with the chair?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So today is September 27th, 2018. We're in Monterey, California, where I lived once, by the way.
Really?
I'll tell you later.
Tell us about it.
And we're at the house of Doris. How do you pronounce her last name?
Auerbach.
Auerbach. Doris Auerbach. And we are here today to talk about your late husband, Hal Auerbach.
Correct.
Just before we talk about Hal, if you can just introduce yourself to me, tell me just a few things about you, just very briefly.
I was born in New York, close to 95 years ago. I expect that. And grew up raised in Manhattan.
Manhattan? Where were you born? Where'd you
In
grow up?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn,
I was
okay.
born in Brooklyn and raised in Manhattan, and Queens, combination of both. And lived there until I was married, but I was in the Navy.
Really?
For in 44 I went in. I was in the Navy for about a year and a half during World War II.
What did you do in the Navy?
Storekeeper at Oakland Supply Depot. Was there, stationed there. And my brother was in the war also. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. He was a soldier in the Battle of the Bulge.
And when did you meet Hal, and when did you guys get married?
Met Hal when he came home from Israel, from his flying in Israel.
So you met him, when did you guys get married?
The following year. He came home in
49?
No, we got married in 50.
In 50. So
He came through in 49 on
okay.
his way to California.
So actually everything that we're going to be talking about him now is stuff that you heard from him. You didn't know him at the time.
I did not know him. I met him through his cousin and saw him and hit it off. And when he returned to New York, called me, and 3 months later we were married. So.
I always hear that 3 months thing.
Really?
With the generation of the people that I'm interviewing with you guys.
Well, we met.
3 months later we were married.
Right.
I hear always these 3 months. I don't know what it is.
By then we knew what we wanted.
Okay.
We recognized it.
Thank you for giving me a little bit of an intro about, because it's important.
Right.
So let's talk about Hal. When was Hal born, and where was he born?
He was born in 1915 in Escanaba, Michigan, which, if you don't know, it's the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Way up there. Way when it goes over. And grew up there. They moved to Chicago, and it was during the Depression. He was born in 15, so he grew up.
Yeah, so he grew up.
Well, not all.
What can you tell me about his parents, about his background?
Well, it's interesting. His mother was born here, and born in the Upper Peninsula, and was a school teacher. And the whole family were. His father was an itinerant optometrist.
Was his father born in the United States?
No, he came from Romania as a young man.
Okay.
And I think he went to Canada for a while because he understood French. He was really quite fluent, but not
Romanian
really.
and French is very similar languages.
Right, yeah, and the Romanians will speak many languages because of it. Anyway, he was fluent. But then he went into the Army, and he became a medic in the Army during the 1898 with the
Spanish-American War?
Spanish-American War.
Wow.
That's when he was a young man, and he wanted English, and he wanted more experience.
So he was in the American-Spanish War, 1898, 1899, as a medic?
as a matter.
Do you remember his name, just for the record?
Of course, William Auerbach.
William Auerbach, which is Hal's grandfather.
His father.
His father,
It was
yeah.
his father who was out. And but after that, Hal was born in 15. This was so. Yeah, he wasn't
married or anything.
No, I think
looking for adventure.
He had 2 older sisters that were born first, and 1 younger brother. Lovely, wonderful, devoted family, wonderful family.
So Hal grew up in a very warm.
Very warm. However, if you want to know about his father, he was this itinerant optometrist, and he had been up there, and he had seen Hal's mother, maybe met her, but he went on down to Mexico. He didn't like the cold weather, so he went to Mexico, and he wrote her, and she was kind of I guess a what do you call a bride that comes down?
I don't know.
Yeah, not quite mail order. Not mail order. He wrote her, and she followed. I don't think they knew each other that well.
Mexico?
They lived in Mexico until the revolution there, and that they had to leave, and they lost their house and went to the Philippines, where another sister was born, and then back and eventually came up to Escanaba, where Hal was born. So he was an itinerant, and
so he was a doctor. He was an optometrist.
Optometrist, yeah.
Does Hal grow up? What kind of house does he grow up in, as far as Judaism, Zionism?
I'll have to show you something. I think I can pull it out about his mother, and something that he sent to the Escanaba paper at a certain time. She had written, and when she went to her high school, I guess she was valedictorian or something for high school at her graduation, and had written a letter about Israel in that time,
Palestine.
and if you can, Palestine in that time, and the need for a home for for Jews. This was long before World War II. Long before World War II. This is. Well, of course, it's before Hal's born, so it was.
It's before Hal's born. She wrote this.
Yes. She was graduated from high school, and this is what he grew up with. Not religious, in any way.
But Zionists.
But I guess Zionist is what you'd call it for him. I don't think he thought of it in that way, but. Just the need for it, and
did it more come from the mother or the father, or just both?
I don't think from the father too much. Although he was born, he was certainly very knowledgeable, but I don't know. No religion, absolute absence of it. He was definitely that.
So Hal, at what age does he go down to Chicago with his family?
High school. His high school years were in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And they had an uncle there, a doctor, that was there, and some family there too. They had a lot of family in the Upper Peninsula, cousins and uncles, and large family. On his mother's side, not many.
Do you by any chance remember, just for the record also, the name, his mother's maiden name?
Oshinsky.
Oshinsky.
You don't forget that.
No, you don't. Thank you. The reason I ask is that just so that these people have some. Mm-hmm. We have names, and it's just important to have that in the archive. Mm-hmm. So he grows up in Chicago. The Great Depression is going on.
Absolutely, yes.
And what does Hal want to be when he's in high school? What does he want to do? Where's his head?
I'm not positive, but they were serious. They were pretty serious people. I'm not sure of that, but certainly that he went to Wisconsin for a year. Actually, where he had met Debbie's father there, and they were friends. And I think just stayed for a year, and I met, maybe Judd only stood that, I don't know how long Judd was there. And then he transferred, probably went out and worked, probably for a year. Then went to UCLA, he wanted to that. And I think he was pretty fluent in Spanish, and he was thinking in terms of maybe marketing in that area of something to do with it.
So he goes to UCLA after a year in Wisconsin?
Yes.
He transfers to UCLA?
He transferred out to California.
We're talking about 1930...
he graduated in 38. And
he graduated high school in 38?
No.
College?
No, that was college.
I just want to make sure your microphone... Yeah, perfect. Hold on. Okay, sorry.
College. And let's see where we're at.
So what does he study at UCLA? Marketing, you said, or no?
No, I'm not positive, really. Okay. I'm sure history and all basic, whatever.
That's fine.
I don't think, he certainly didn't go into engineering, though he could have. I think political science probably was there. I'm sure it was that. I didn't ever ask him. Where was I going with that?
I'll tell you. We were talking about him going to UCLA.
Yes.
That he graduates college in 1938.
38. What I will say is that he always had a fascination with planes.
With planes.
Whether he had it, as a kid. Cars, he knows, even always, he knew every car, anything to do with a car. And airplanes, he knew every airplane and was always quite fascinated. You would know about Mines Field, which was the small field in LA that is the antecedent to LAX now.
And what would he do there?
They learned to fly there.
So he learned to fly before the war even?
Absolutely.
Before the war?
Before World War II.
As a civil pilot or a civil...
Yeah, pilot, but he was at school, and then he went into the Navy after school. He worked for Douglas Aircraft.
Okay.
And that was, so he was quite enamored of that.
When the war breaks out, he already has his pilot license?
Pretty sure, yes.
Yeah, he's already got his...
Yeah, he did.
The war breaks out, and he goes into the Navy.
He goes into
I'm sure they need people like him,
Yeah, but this was the year before.
So he went into the Navy before the war started?
Oh, absolutely. Probably 2 years before. And he was an ensign. He was at Pearl Harbor. So.
Was he?
He was on December 7th.
What did he tell you about Pearl Harbor?
It's in it. I have something for you about it. On December 7th or 6th, he was at the advanced base, Midway. And they had to fly back to Pearl Harbor that night on December 7th. But that was his base. Pearl Harbor was his base. They were on assignment over, and he flew PBYs. And they were looking, actually, what he was doing then is they were flying reconnaissance, looking for the Japanese that they really knew were around there. They just didn't know that they were right at Pearl Harbor. And they were looking there. So they were there, and that's what they were doing, but then they were called back to Pearl Harbor that night.
But by the time he gets back to Pearl Harbor, it's all...
Well, that's, the over. Japanese is, yes, it's all
so
over,
he comes back to the devastation.
Except the smoke. And all the stuff, what it was.
So he comes back to the total devastation.
Right.
Did he ever tell you about how he felt or what kind of impression it left on him? Did he ever talk about it?
No, no, I don't think.
I'm sure he knew a lot of people who died.
And I never would have thought to ask him about that. We were on, and by the time I knew him, but I always was, I was in the Navy myself, and I was very proud of what he did, and that he was a pilot.
As the war progresses, what kind of things does Hal do during the war? Where is he stationed after?
He was there stayed at Pearl Harbor for a while, but then he went to Australia, and he was commander of a small base in Western Australia for the balance of the war.
And is that where he was when the war ended?
No, I think by that time he was back at Willow Grove, which is Pennsylvania. But he was there probably 2 or 3 years, and that's when they were also, the PBYs were looking for the Japanese and around that.
For the record, the PBYs are reconnaissance airplanes, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
When does he get this?
And water.
Yeah.
order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When does Hal, when the war is over, he's in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm sure quite soon after the war he gets discharged also, or does he?
Oh yeah, probably early. Probably they're one of the first they would be.
Do you remember what kind of rank he was when he got discharged? Was he like a captain?
Lieutenant commander.
Lieutenant commander.
Mm-hmm. That, and then actually he joined the, I don't know, I think he took off for a little and they went sailing and did a few things. Took care of a sister who had leukemia and was dying. This I only know because, he's told me. I wasn't there. I didn't know him at that time. But he did, he was an FAA inspector, worked for the FAA.
After the war?
After the war prior to
and what is the FAA?
Going to Israel.
It's like the
Federal Aviation Authority.
He was an inspector or something? Inspector.
Mm-hmm. Right, actually in California. Because he settled in California after the war.
So, after the war, I'd say 1946, 47, as we know, as we look back at it on a historical perspective, the situation in Palestine starts to heat up. And I'm sure you remember this from your own recollection, even though you weren't with Hal, but there's thousands and thousands of Holocaust refugees who are not being permitted to come in. They're being sent to internment camps in Cyprus. Mm-hmm. The situation in Palestine between the Arabs and the Jews and the British is like, I'm sure the explosion at the King David Hotel and a lot of other different things which made worldwide news at the time. Mm-hmm. And Hal's in California. He's back to civilian life. Mm-hmm. As far as your your memory of him, how does he even get involved with the idea of helping the cause of Palestine, of the Jewish? Did he ever say anything to you? I was sitting here and the UN made this decision and I realized that this, and a guy came up to me. Do you remember how this, because there were Haganah agents in LA who were apparently approaching people, and Hal had a pretty, remarkable record.
Right.
I mean,
they were looking,
him.
Yeah. But the only thing I know is that he was introduced to it through his friend Judd Weil, who know this woman, and you might know her name, and I can't remember it because I'm bad about names, but she was in Bakersfield. She was teaching pilots there.
She was teaching
They
pilots.
were teaching pilots. It was, And Judd had told, go see so-and-so. He knew, and I know the name, I just can't think, it doesn't come up to me right now. And so anyway, go see her about it. And then, of course, I think maybe he knew about it. I don't know what he knew then, because nothing, and it was foregone by the time I knew him. Everything was done, he was in it, it was over. I don't think I, queried why, but I do know that he cared. And what it is it was the Holocaust had happened. And that he knew. I mean, that I definitely heard. He was definitely aware of it. And that's probably why it was, because they needed it. Where were they going? He knew about the ships and the people going to Israel. I mean, that I know. So anything more than that, and
do you know when he left for Palestine?
Sometime in it's 48.
Okay, but you said that he took
this is from, well, you must know that story, but
Please, no.
Well, they were in New Jersey, and the planes were there. They were gathered. The planes were in New Jersey.
What kind of planes were they? Do you know? Cargo planes?
DC-3s or C-46s, C-46s.
So they were in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And it's him. Is he with some other people? Is there a few planes?
Several. One was his cousin.
Who?
Bob Lurie. Bob Lurie also from Escanaba. And he had been he had been a bomber pilot, I think, or navigator, and during World War II. Everybody was in the war somewhere along, anyone you knew. And there were 3, I don't know how many were leaving, to tell you the truth, but the story was they had to get out. And they had to get out of New Jersey.
You were telling me about what, was it dangerous for them to be in New Jersey?
Of course, there was an embarcation.
Embargo.
Embargo, not embarkation. Embargo, thank you. Yes, of course there was this embargo, and they wanted to get them out, so everything was at night. They did this. They did more night flying than anybody, all of them. And they went, I guess, I can't remember where, they were going to Panama, and they must have landed someplace and probably lost a plane en route somewhere along, I'm not just sure when something went. But they all gathered at one spot, and there was a large group of them that managed. They didn't all come from New Jersey.
Right, but they all met in Panama, is that? Or
Panama, or maybe some Mexico, or is there another? There was some intermediate before Panama, I think.
It could be very well Panama, because Panama was getting money under the table from the Haganah and from very wealthy Jews in America.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And Panama gave flag papers to ships. Mm-hmm. So it could make sense that it was Panama, actually. So.
Probably.
And then they flew to Palestine.
Then they flew to Palestine, and they went, that whole itinerary was...
Just try and see what you remember.
Well, they landed in the coast of Africa.
Could be, yeah.
Sure.
Morocco?
I'm sure, yeah. Well, I'm not just sure, one of them. And they were just, they couldn't fly, don't forget. It was Cold War, and certain countries you could not fly over. And just getting out of the States with all these planes was very difficult for them.
And of course, he's risking, does he even have a passport when he leaves?
I'm sure he did, but we flew one time when his expired, and he didn't even know it. So that was way after the war. After the war, when we did.
So he gets to Palestine.
Yeah.
And what is he doing?
No, they bring their planes to Czechoslovakia. So that's it. But there were some intermediate stops, and I can't tell you just where it was.
They go to Czechoslovakia.
And then they start the airlift with airplanes and everything that they could. Everything they could.
So he's one of the pilots.
With some of the help, they had help from Russia too.
From Czechoslovakia.
Yeah. Czechoslovakia.
It's a very interesting story, because the Czechoslovakia, that deal was done in the last second. Because after that.
Right. And
I know, yeah. So
there were some countries they could not fly over.
Sure.
They had to they had to go a kind of circuitous route to get to Israel, and also at night.
So
everything was done at night.
Was his job to go back and forth between Czechoslovakia and Israel and just get as many loads as possible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know how many it's in the book and or in his flight manual, the flight record of the flights. That was the main thing about it, what he did. And I guess they were there until the peace was declared, and the UN recognized it with Truman's help.
Yes, it's very interesting that a lot of people, Truman on one hand, he recognized Israel immediately.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, he imposed an embargo. So.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It's tricky.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, that embargo is, as I'm sure you've heard from your husband many times, without those weapons from Czechoslovakia, the war could have completely tipped. There was no bullets. There was nothing.
But they got a lot of other help from America too.
Like
money and
from American Jews.
Yes.
Yes.
A lot.
From the government.
And from, not too much. No. But they were getting it from Russia then. It's funny how things did change. Yeah.
What did Hal ever talk to you? I mean, I'm sure you've been with him to Israel.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember? And again, I'm just asking you to dig into your memory. Was there anything particular? Do you remember a story that he would tell you, that he told you about the time that he was in the Mahal, and he would, like, even the stupidest little story or anything that comes to mind that did he ever talk to you about the Mahal Club?
No, I don't know.
There was a club for all the Mahal soldiers on Hayarkon Street in Tel Aviv, and it apparently was a pretty wild place.
Oh well, there was a hotel that they always stayed at. I know, actually, when we went back in '52, so it was pretty close, and they were pretty wonderful to us when we went back. It was an interesting time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's also the story about, if you could tell me about Ezra Weitzman, Chaim Weitzman. Ezra Weitzman's nephew.
That they were getting they were flying him in, and they had to outfit they didn't have the proper plane for him, so they outfitted a plane, and they got uniforms, and they wanted to be, very representative of Israel. And of course, Hal, coming out of the Navy, I think he could appreciate that even more, because it's full of, institution and
dress codes
and things like that. I mean, that's what he got out of the Navy. Though he probably was that way anyway himself. Pretty neat.
It was a flight to Switzerland to pick up Chaim Weitzman.
Right. And they had to also, that's another one, they had to do all of that at night. These night flights and coming in. I think I believe they had to come in with him. I know all of the things that during the war, everything they flew in at night anyway. That's why sometimes they had accidents.
Did he tell you that he flew the plane?
Oh, yeah.
Did he ever tell you anything about his encounter with Chaim Weitzman? Did he ever tell you?
Not really. No. If he did, I'm not sure that it, all I can say is it was his greatest honor.
He was very proud of it?
Yes, very
maybe
proud.
Also one of El Al's first flights.
Yes, it was El Al's first flight. Mm-hmm. And very proud of it, and even a little note, I think he knew Ezra Weitzman in the war, because it's a nephew, not a son. I wasn't sure about that. But he always said that he flew two presidents of Israel.
Ezra
two Weitzman and the
Chaim Weitzman.
Yeah, I don't know where he flew Ezra to, I'm not sure. But anyway, during the war they knew it. He was a fighter pilot during the war. So he was pretty,
Well, he was British trained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So he was. But yes, he was very proud of that, and his experience there. But I don't have any. It probably wouldn't have meant too much to me at the time. But,
and
you were interested in one thing that I remember, some incident, more than an incident. They were, just tell you what they had to go through when they did do the airlift. The airlift. They were flagged down over Italy and in jail for a while. And I should have refreshed my memory about the story and how they got out. All I know is they became great friends with the Italians when they were there. are reasonably good friends. And then they loaded the plane with food for them and things that they needed. And I think Hal told the rest of the crew that was the other pilots that were making the same trip, that if they had to go down there.
In that area?
That area.
Yeah.
If they had to, and that they thought they had a friend there. But it wasn't that friendly when they flagged them down. The planes came up and, said, get down, you don't belong up in this airstream. So, but that's the one thing I remember about it. But I know it was stressful, but they were a lot of young people committed to what they were doing.
Sure. And
with the youth on their side and excitement on their side, they were,
And was it something that he was very proud of throughout the years?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think Hal continued, but I've heard a lot of the men talk about it. It was the most wonderful thing they ever did. I don't. I know Hal felt that way. I did. He didn't have to express. It wasn't anything he had to express. No. And I know other people were very proud of him. Yeah, what he did.
Okay, so what we'll do now is I'm going to stop the camera, and I'm going to take some photographs. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to photograph those interviews. Mm-hmm. Unless you would like to read some of them or something, or like
photograph the.
There's some papers in your kitchen, in your bed, of
right.
Some interviews with him, and also some stuff that he wrote.
Yes,
so that would be. Or maybe you'd like to read a little something, and then I can take some photographs. If we can, maybe find just a little. I'm gonna just go get it for a sec. Just start reading a little. This is something that Hal wrote, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Almost 50 years ago, on September 30th, when the State of Israel was 4 months old and fighting for its life against 5 invading Arab armies, a 4-engine Douglas Skymaster DC-4 type airline took off about midnight from an Israel Air Force runway south of Tel Aviv. With all lights out to avoid enemy interception, the airliner climbed westward over the Mediterranean on a 2,400-mile nonstop flight to Geneva, Switzerland. It was the first flight of El Al. Its mission was to bring Dr. Chaim Weizmann, Israel's first president, home to Israel from a hospital in Geneva. Before dawn the next day, returning with Dr. Weizmann aboard, the airliner touched down in Israel, taxied to its ramp, and shut down its engines. Waiting there in the night were officials of the new Israeli government to welcome President Weizmann home. For the 4-month-old nation, the first flight of El Al was historic. For the first time, the blue and white flag of the State of Israel flew on the tail of an international airliner. For the first time, a major nation acknowledged Israel's existence by permitting an Israeli aircraft to enter its airspace. For the first time, the name El Al, Israeli National Aviation Company, lettered in Hebrew and in English, was seen in a foreign land. The flight also put the world on notice that little Israel was taking its place among nations in international air commerce. El Al is now one of the world's finest airlines with the most advanced aircraft and best trained flight crews. I will confide to my Oshinsky Mishpoka that it didn't exactly start out that way. You want more? The odyssey that led me to Israel began in California in March '48, months before Israel was born. A World War II U.S. Navy pilot, I was one of about 150 airmen, mostly Jews, but some Christians too, who volunteered to go to Palestine to help fight for the birth and survival of the proposed Jewish state. We were aircrew who flew in the World War II American, Canadian, British, and other air forces. In Israel, we were known as Mahal, and Hebrew acronym which translates to Volunteers from Overseas. With money from the Jewish Agency for Palestine, a masquerade airline named Líneas Aéreas de Panama, Sociedad, and so called LAPSA, was created. LAPSA bought 10 war surplus, almost new, long-range C-46 Curtiss Commando cargo planes, the biggest twin-engine cargo plane used by the U.S. Army Air Force in World War II. All LAPSA planes bore Panamanian registry. Officially, we were the national airline of the Republic of Panama. In reality, we were a clandestine prenatal squadron of the not-yet-born Israel Air Force. With the Panama flag on our tail, we flew in stages to Mexico, Panama, Dutch Guiana, Brazil, across the Atlantic Ocean to Africa, north to Morocco, Sicily, and through the Iron Curtain to a former Nazi fighter strip near Prague. At the time, Czechoslovakia was a Soviet satellite. On May 15, 1948, Israel declared itself a nation. We began an airlift from Czechoslovakia to Israel, a 4,600-mile round-trip flight, refueling on the French island of Corsica. We arrived in Israel under cover of night, unloaded, and got out before dawn. Inside our C-46s were disassembled Messerschmitt Me-109 fighter planes, guns and ammunition. In a few days, the reassembled Me-109s were flown in combat. We also brought machine guns and other weaponry that Israeli soldiers took into battle 10 miles from the airport. Leaving Israel during its first desperate weeks of existence, we were asked to heave bombs out our back door into Egyptian forces threatening Tel Aviv. We did, picking up a few inconsequential bullet holes as we left. About 3 months later, mid-August 1948, the Czechs abruptly evicted us, possibly pressured to do so by the U.S. State Department, catering to Aramco, the Arabian American oil company. Still flying the Panama flag, all our planes flew to Israel in time to support a major battle by Israel to seize the Negev from the Egyptian army. For about 2 months, LAPS's planes flew all-night shuttles, ferrying troops and equipment to Negev outposts and bringing back wounded to our base at Ekron, now called Tel Naf. A passenger on one of my flights to the Negev was a young fighter pilot named Ezer Weizman, now president of Israel. By September 1948, Israel had captured most of the Negev. An order came from Israel Air Force headquarters saying that Israel was creating its own commercial airline. The only aircraft Israel had capable of reaching Geneva nonstop, a 4-engine C-54 cargo ship, was to be converted into a commercial airline. It was to become a posh flagship for the new airline appropriate for flying the President of Israel home. All crew members were to be fitted with new airline uniforms and carry Israeli passports and civil aviation licenses. The announcement set off a swirl of activity and speculation. Bets were taken on what the airline would be named. Most of us thought it would be Air Israel. Other possibilities were Israel Airlines or Israel Air. Our squadron humorist, Ray Kurtz of blessed memory, a pilot from New York, joked it should be named Irving Airlines. Israel Airlines sounds too Jewish. Finally, the Minister of Transportation, David Remez, chose the name El Al, a biblical quotation from the Hebrew prophet Hosea, meaning to the above. Kurtz quipped that Hosea and Minister Remez had stolen the name from TWA Airline, whose trademark slogan was, "Up, up, and away." A flight crew of 12 was selected, 3 pilots, 2 flight engineers, 2 radio men, 2 navigators, 2 flight stewardess, and a steward chef. Although I had flown the proposed C-54 flagship only 2 times in the Negev, Hillel Bahir, my Hebrew name, was designated captain of the first flight of El Al. To be continued.
Perfect.
I don't know how much, but that kind of brings, everything is there together, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I know, there were so many different times.
So El Al wanted him to stay in Israel and become a pilot with them?
I think they asked him to.
They asked him to.
And for some, I think I'm not sure whether he thought he had to give up his citizenship and he wasn't quite ready for that. I'm not sure. There might have been other things too. I think El wanted their pilots to be certainly someone that would be captain and up there and really they wanted them to be citizens.
Okay.
I think they did it right.
That was great that you read this to me. That was very good because it answered a lot of questions that I had, and I wanted you to read it because I wanted you to.
Okay.
I have you here in front of the camera. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a few pictures of these documents, of these interviews of his, and that photograph that you have on your bed. And then I think we're going to, and I'm going to give you a release form that you need to fill out.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No problem.
Is there anything else that you would like to mention about Hal?
I don't think so. Okay. I think he's a wonderful husband and father.
Sure. How many children?
Fine man. We had 4, 2 are gone now. Yeah. We have 2 sons left. Yeah.
Thank you, Doris.
You're welcome, Josh.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It was pretty painless.
Was it?
Yeah.
Good.
Made it easy.